All right. Hey, guys. Welcome to another episode of the OCD and Anxiety Show. My name is Matt Cotty. And on today's show, we're going to talk about OCD and anxiety treatment. And specifically, we're going to talk about the voice in the mind, right? And really how we navigate that whole experience. Because, for many of us, we know that there's this voice in the mind going on, right? And we understand that it usually produces a lot of distressing thoughts, distressing images, worrisome thoughts about the future. And our ability to navigate that voice in the mind is a huge aspect of the treatment and recovery process, right? So, what I want to talk today about is that voice in the mind, a new way to potentially understand it, something I use a lot with my clients, and just kind of like a concept. So I want to really dive into that today. Before we go in, um, do us a favor, please, and help us out by liking and subscribing, as well as giving us a comment or question down below in the notes, so that we have ideas about future episodes that we can make, things that might help you out, things that you would like us to address. Would really appreciate it, as well as sharing this with friends and family that may struggle with OCD and anxiety. Just to make sure we can get the right help to people. Also, if you're new to this platform and channel, we have resources over at restoredminds.com to support you. And there's some notes right down in, there's some links right down in the notes below that can lead you some resources to get started with us. So thank you so much. So let's go ahead and dive in today to the idea of propaganda, right? And this is something that I want to talk about with regard to the voice in the mind. And I know you're like, well, propaganda, man, is this political? I'm not about that. It's okay. So just like, give me a second, because propaganda, it's a really interesting way to understand the voice of the mind. And so let me go ahead and read a definition of propaganda. And this is just straight pulled off Wikipedia. Okay. But I want to break down the definition and kind of explain how OCD and anxiety, in many ways, we can really look at the voice of the mind in a sense of propaganda. Okay. And so to start the definition, so it says propaganda is communication that is primarily used to influence an audience and further an agenda. Okay, so let's stop there. So when we're talking about influence, what are we talking about? We're talking about the idea to direct one's thinking and behavior, right? And we're, when they talk about people being an influencer, right? You're inspiring and directing. And influence is neither good nor bad. It's just influence, right? You can be influenced to do something really good. Someone might have influenced you to invest in Bitcoin when it was, 5 cents. And that was like a really good decision on your end. Otherwise, other times influence can be negative, right? You can get influenced to do something that you shouldn't do, and there's results of that. Influence is neither good nor bad. It's just the idea of directing, right? And when we're talking about influencing an audience, the voice of your mind, I mean, one of the biggest things that I always harp on again and again and again in OCD and anxiety recovery is the first thing you really need to understand is that you are not this voice in your mind, right? Like, you are the one who hears it, right? And Michael Singer does a phenomenal job in his book, The Untethered Soul, really breaking that down, right? You're really talking about this idea of witness consciousness and separating yourself from your voice of your mind. And why that's so important is because if you think you're the voice of the mind and you think you're every thought that's going on up here, well, there's a lot of stuff that goes on up there, right? And it's usually wrong, right? I mean, if you can really look back at the voice of your mind and really look back in the past and ask yourself, well, how many times has the voice of your mind been right? Just sit and ponder that question for a second. Like, how many times has it been right? And the reality is it's slim to none, right? Because normally the voice of the mind is usually predicting these what if thoughts, these kind of scary thoughts about the future or intrusive thoughts. And at the end of it, it usually never happens. So we invest all this energy and time, trying to navigate and prevent all these things that the voice of the mind is saying. And most of them never happen. And this is usually the start of the battle when it comes to OCD and anxiety, is just how much stuff is going on in the person's mind. Now, I remember when I was really struggling with OCD and anxiety, when I was about 18, 19, it was really, which was roughly about 15 years ago. But I mean, when I was really caught in that loop, the thing is that sometimes it just feels like there's so many thoughts flooding into your mind that you almost feel like you're drowning in them, you know? And I mean, if any of you guys can relate to that, like, please, like, yeah, throw it in the chat or whatever down below, because it's like, it's really hard to explain that experience to someone who's never lived through it. But these what if thoughts, what we need to understand is like I said, that's the idea is to influence and then to further an agenda. And then, so to continue the definition, it says the agenda may not be objective and may be selectively presenting facts to encourage a particular perception, using loaded language to produce an emotional rather than rational response. So this is pretty fascinating, right? Because when you look at the voice of the mind and you look at the OCD cycle, right? There's four components of the OCD cycle, and the anxiety cycle, right? So this cycle works the same for essentially all forms of anxiety, right? You have the thought, you have the feeling, and you have the behavior, and you have the relief that one gets from that. Okay, so when we talk about the idea of propaganda and really understanding the voice of the mind of propaganda, what we need to understand is when that mechanism starts, right, and that wheel really starts spinning, what happens is it goes, and it goes fast. And the more behaviors you do, the more that wheel spins and the more it gets reinforced. And then, which then the thoughts keep coming and so on and so forth, right? And that wheel just kind of keeps spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning. And when we talk about the idea of propaganda, the whole idea is to influence and get someone to do something, right? And so the voice of the mind really serves as this fear cycle's propaganda, in this metaphor, right? What it wants you to do is do a behavior that will ultimately create that relief and reinforce the cycle. So if we're using a very prototypical example of like a contamination fear, if that voice in your mind, produces a thought of like, well, what if I get sick, or what if I get contaminated, right? And after you touch a doorknob, right? It's just a very prototypical example. But again, this could be any intrusive thought. This could be fear about social anxiety. This could be fear about having a panic attack. But this idea of what if this happens, right? And then you get anxious, and then you do a behavior to neutralize that. In this case, maybe washing your hands, or in the case of panic attacks, maybe avoiding that party, or whatever it is, right? And whatever behavior you do, that then creates the relief. That cycle forms, right? And now it's almost a life force of its own. And this is the thing, is that when that wheel starts spinning, it really does become its own life force, and you have to see it like that. And the propaganda that it's going to shoot at you is going to be designed to drive you to do behaviors that are going to keep the wheel going, right? So when that life force starts, it doesn't want to stop. And this is what I mean about propaganda. When you understand that it's going to shoot you information that is not necessarily objective and doesn't load with doesn't have all the facts, using loaded language to produce an emotional rather than rational response, that's the goal of that voice of the mind, is to create an emotional response within you, so you do the behaviors, so that wheel stays alive. Okay, now hopefully that makes sense, because I mean, like, once you understand that, then what it's saying, again, once you start to understand it, it's like, if you can just see it as propaganda, like it's okay, there's nothing that I actually need to pay attention to. That changes your relationship, because if you see the voice of the mind and everything it says as like, I need to listen to this, this is the most important thing, and I need to react to it every time it says something, I need you to understand that it's gonna create a lot of frustration and problems, and that is the point I'm trying to make here, is that when you understand the voice of the mind in the context of the propaganda, right, and really seeing it as something that's trying to influence you to do your safety behaviors that will keep that wheel going, you can start to outfox it and outsmart it, and kind of see one step ahead. When we're in a reactive state, though, and we're reacting to every thought that we have, it's got the upper hand on us because it will just keep throwing thoughts. I mean, for any of you that wrestle with OCD and anxiety, like, does that voice of the mind stop throwing thoughts? Like, does it let up? It's like, no, when things get heavy, in fact, that's when it starts throwing things on more, right? When things are really rough, it just starts like throwing them out every second. And all those what if thoughts, right? When we can start to separate ourselves from the voice of the mind and start to see it as, quote, propaganda that we don't need to always listen to, and more importantly, instead of reacting to it, responding to it in a healthy way that aligns with our long-term values and goals and aligns with our long-term recovery as opposed to our short-term comfort and our short-term relief. That's when we can start to really make some big strides and big breaks in our recovery process. So hopefully that analogy helps you. I just wanted to share that today because I really find that idea fascinating, and even just seeing how propaganda is used. And you can go and, Google some, famous cases of propaganda and just kind of see and really see the propaganda for what it is objectively, right? Because when we're dealing with the voice of the mind, it's really hard to be objective with that sometimes. So getting that space in your mind between you and your mind is so important to your success on this journey. And also just understanding that just because your mind's saying something does not mean it's true. Like, it's a huge point that I just want to leave here with today. So, with that said, we'll tie up for today, and I just want to say thanks so much for tuning in to this episode, as well as if you're looking for additional help and additional resources on this journey, we have some links right down in the notes beneath this episode where you can get links to some downloads as well as some additional trainings, as well as our private community and our live coachings that we do and seminars and workshops. Actually, we have a workshop coming up that I wanted to just let you guys know about in October, and it's going to be on taboo and intrusive thoughts. And so I'm doing a workshop with another therapist. So it's going to be live. I think we're either going to do 1 day or 2 days. We haven't fully decided yet. So just keep an eye out for that. And so yeah, thanks so much for hanging out today, guys. Wish you guys a great week, and we will see you on the next episode. Take care.